All right, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Dr. Leah Shanley, Co-Executive Director of the South Big Data Innovation Hub. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Hub, we are funded through the NSF, National Science Foundation, and our host institutions. We catalyze and strengthen public-private partnerships to apply data science to real-world challenges. For those of you who may not, before we get started, I'd like to mention a few things, a little housekeeping. For those of you on WebEx, we ask that you mute your mic unless you've been called on to ask a question to panelists. There is a chat box in WebEx, which you can kind of raise your hand and tell Carl Gustafson, our Senior Project Manager who is watching the WebEx feed, that you have a question to ask, and then we will call on you. For those of you who tweet, please use hashtags South Big Data Hub 17, SBDH 17, also BD Hubs and Data Science. And also you can follow us on Twitter at South Big Data Hub. So welcome to the Big Data Hub monthly roundtable series. We provide an open forum for exploring emerging research questions in data science and hopefully identify some of the solutions. Our discussion today will focus on applying artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence augmentation to the diagnosis of rare diseases. We have 4 distinguished panelists today from the Rare Disease Observatory Project. They are recipients of the National Science Foundation Big Data Hub planning grant. So we're very excited to have them here today. Since last fall, the roundtable has featured a series of the NSF's Big Data Hub scope and planning grant projects. With that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Britt, who is the Associate Chair of the North Carolina Rare Disease Advisory Council and founder of the nonprofit NC Rare Disease Innovation Institute. She co-wrote the legislation, HB 823, to create Rare Disease Advisory Council, which is housed at the UNC School of Medicine under the direction of Bruce Cairns. And Dr. Bruce Cairns is the John Stackhouse Distinguished Professor of Surgery with a joint appointment in microbiology and immunology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He also is the medical director of the North Carolina J.C. Burns Center and elected chair of the faculty at University of Chapel Hill. And then we have Dr. Michael Kowolenko, is currently the director of the Institute of the Next Generation Computing, an industry fellow in the Center of Innovation Management Studies, research professor in the Department of Computer Science at North Carolina State University, and director of the Institute of Next Generation IT Systems. And Sandra Talbird is a senior director of health economics at RTIHS. She's a member of the newly created North Carolina Rare Disease Coalition based on her involvement in rare diseases as an associate trustee of the nonprofit organization Cadasil Association, and she's also here to represent the patient perspective. So with that, we'd like to get started. Tara, give us a brief overview of this project, and then we will go from there.
Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about how we got here. Stephanie, yeah. And tell you a little bit about rare diseases in general. A lot of people don't really know the statistics. Rare diseases are defined about 1 in 10 people have rare diseases. There's 7,000 rare diseases. Collectively, they affect more people than HIV and cancer combined, which is a pretty staggering statistic. 80% of rare diseases are genetic, and 50% of children, 35% of those children don't live with disease. So it's pretty, if you look at it, thinking about when we wrote the legislation, it's all about the patient and the patient advocates and their families. And the legislation I'm fortunate enough to write was Sharon King. And I wanted to write, to just tell you a little bit while I got involved. So I worked with researchers at UNC with rare disease, and we started meeting with patients and advocates who fund the research to try to find a cure for rare disease. And this is Taylor before she was diagnosed. She was diagnosed around her 7th year of life. And she was diagnosed with that disease, which is a neurological fatal disease. And this is her before and this is her after. And as we were educating the legislature when we were or trying to form this Rare Disease Advisory Council, we said, 1 million of your constituents in North Carolina have a rare disease. That means their families are affected, the community is affected. So that, I just want to remind people, the data is great, and it's going to help, hopefully, with the project we're working on will help speed up diagnosis time and accelerate treatment. We hope that that's where this leads. We think it will. So that's why the data is so important for this project. But this is really why we're here. She is the basis why we're here. And so I just like to tell people a little bit more about it. It gives it more personal touch than, oh, I'm just writing this data. It's really the impact for these people. Great. I'll turn it over to Dr. Bruce Cairns.
So, hello, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here in person and also talk to folks online. So, as was mentioned, I'm a surgeon and I take care of burn patients, but also patients with severe exfoliative skin conditions, drug reactions, and so forth. So I deal with a fair amount of rare diseases. I also have a lab and have been funded through the NSF and Institute of Medicine and NIH. And our approach to this is about solving a real-world problem that's very timely and very challenging. Talk about big data, big challenges, but also big impact. What do I mean? Imagine 7,000 diseases that some of them are known, cystic fibrosis, and some of them are unknown, where we might be able to understand what the gene is or maybe not. That's big data there, mapping the human genome. This whole focus on precision medicine and personalized medicine, and how can we repurpose drugs to figure out how to use them. Another set of big data. The drug targeting industry and the FDA and the way you develop drugs and the various variants and how do you get through the FDA process. That's another big set of data. Electronic medical record, the patients that we take care of, the ones that are diagnosed, the ones that aren't diagnosed, the ones that get payer claims that go through Health and Human Services. And then what's it like to be a patient in a family who has all of this economic impact, both personally as well as in your family and in your community. So like a laser, we're focused on a relatively straightforward couple of words, rare diseases, but the impacts and the challenges for data management are enormous. What's valuable about this, though, even though it sounds like a chaotic set of data, is that each one of the questions has relevance to a real-world answer. So if you just figure out one gene or one drug target, you could develop a medication that could still impact thousands of people. Maybe you could develop a better strategy for drug approval and clinical trials. So the whole idea is that we not just look at this as a way of analyzing data and trying to bring people together, but we transform the way we look at data. We need people who think about data systems, who think about big world problems, who think about climate change and other things that are so difficult to model. And what kind of lessons can we learn to be able to address these problems in a very tangible way, in a very specific condition for a very specific individual, but also on a larger population level, because it could fundamentally transform the way we develop medications and the way we treat people, because how else are we going to do that with limited resources in the future? We've got to become more efficient. We have all of these data systems, we have all of these ways of looking at these problems. Pharma is very interested in it now because of the opportunities it represents, but nobody has the data. And if they have the data, they don't know how to analyze it. So that's our first approach, and is my 3 more minutes? I don't need them. I'll let Mike take my 3 minutes. I'm stunned. Everybody is. Who knows me? I know Stan is. He can't believe it.
Yeah.
I want to, before you throw, I did want to add one more fact. 95% of rare diseases have no known cure. 95% of those 7,000. That's a very important fact as it relates to.
Well, but so since I do have a little extra time, sorry, Mike. Ocular melanoma, rare disease, cancer. If you have a melanoma, it's a rare disease for you because most of the treatments we have don't work. So it becomes more than just about rare diseases. It becomes about common disease. It becomes about combinations of diseases and drug therapies that you use. It becomes about evaluating new treatments and whether or not they're the best modalities. And of course, as we map families or map communities and we look at public health, all of these things become integrated in how we're thinking about data in the healthcare space. But what's nice about what we're proposing is that there's a very focused agenda on rare diseases because of the interest of the coalitions and of the NIH and of pharma driving this particular element of this question forward so that if somebody can create a political enterprise like we have in the state of North Carolina, we can actually have the wherewithal to bring all of these things together and show others around the country how to do it as well.
I'm Mike Kowolenko. I joined this illustrious group a few months ago in looking at how we can perhaps apply different tools with regard to data analytics to this problem. And truthfully, this is something that's interested me for many, many years. Before I came to academia, which was about 8 years ago, I was in the pharmaceutical industry. I spent about 25 years there and made it up fairly high up in the food chain. I've been involved in the development of several therapeutics for rare diseases, recombinant factor 8, recombinant factor 9, FC fusion product factor 8, alpha-1 antitrypsin, those sorts of compounds that were really helpful and changed people's lives. So it's tremendously important that we understand how to identify a target and how to identify the symptomology of these different rare diseases, because it enables us to design the appropriate therapeutic. Now, one of the issues that I came up with pharma was the fact that we had collected tons and tons of data. We had no good way of analyzing it. And to me, when I left the industry, it became a real driver to figure out how can I build systems that allow me to use data in a relatively frictionless fashion so that we can enable people to do their jobs better, or to gain a greater understanding of the environment in which they're dealing. So if we could combine these two things together and let the machine do what it's good at and let the human do what it's good at, we come up with a much more efficient system that can truly benefit lots of people. So that really is my underlying drive and why I'm delighted to participate in this project, is bringing together all those things that I value, in the sense that we're doing good for people. We're going to make sure that we can use data in a powerful fashion, and we want to open it up so that people understand the processes that we use so that it can be replicated in other places. Okay? I hope you can understand me. I'm not suffering from a rare disease, but rather just getting over the flu. I have 3 more minutes. Oh, good. Okay. So anyway, when we started down this journey of looking at data, one thing that became very, very clear is, and I sort of related back to when I was back in graduate school. I go to the Cowboy Library in Boston, and you go in there and you see all the books there, and I said, if I knew how to ask a question in the appropriate manner, the answer's in here. And I sort of look at data in the same way. It's all stacked up in these different piles, and it's up to us to figure out how to develop a process that allows us to extract the important pieces of information that can enable a decision. That's really what we want to do. Data analysis for the sake of data analysis is worthless. You have to enable a decision process with it. That is, who has this disease? What can we do better for this person? What are some other correlates that we can bring up? What are the targets? These are very pointed questions. When we ask machines to answer questions, they don't handle ambiguity very well, right? Ambiguity is what allowed the Tesla to drive into a trailer truck. Machines don't do that. What we have to be good at is understanding how to focus the question and understanding the facts that are necessary to answer that question. And machines will never get tired. They'll never stop looking as long as you point in the right direction.
Do I have 15 seconds to?
There you go. I relinquish some of my time to you.
So, from a clinical perspective, we need whatever it is that Mike and the group of partners, which we hope might include people in this room, we need it to go beyond what's known in the books and be able to tie it together with the data. Because one of the biggest problems is that people don't know what to recognize. They don't even know what it is that they're looking for. So the system has to be able to suggest and prompt and lead us towards a correlation. So for some of these rare diseases, I have a niece who has one of these syndromes. The various body systems that are affected, it's not always entirely clear. But if you have a system that says, well, you have this gene problem or you have these sorts of syndromes, you need to look in the respiratory tract as well. So that it becomes intuitive that these processes become linked. Because as Tara mentioned, if you're born with these, things will happen and be manifested many years later. So it's more than just trying to manage the data we know. What do we do with the data we don't know, what we might know in the future, and how can we then make meaningful decisions?
And let me add one thing too. Also, as we were explaining to our Congressman Butterfield a couple of weeks ago, he's been appointed to the Congressional Rare Disease Caucus, and we were talking about the diagnosis time if you're in a rural area. A lot of this, if you're not around you don't live around the UNC or you don't live around the Duke, the diagnosis time can take many more years, which adds a financial burden to the family, to the state, and as well as just the frustration of not knowing of it taking so long for diagnostic time. So part of what we're working on with NC State is really trying to figure out how we can accelerate these diagnoses, especially in rural areas where it takes so long. I will let you finish.
To follow up on what Bruce is saying, though, when you sit there and you think about how we're looking at it from a systems biology approach, basically, can we take a systems biology approach and mimic it in some way, shape, or form in how we do our analytic and how we look at connections? You know, I can start out by looking at an organ, I can look at a cell, I can look at a biochemical pathway, I can look at genetic activity in the sense of transcription, translation, those sorts of things. Where can I use these sorts of systems to start to make those connections? Well, if I know pathways and I know commonalities in these things, then I can start to do my inferences, so the machine can help me collect and sort and reorganize the information that can give me new indications of what may happen. If we think about it in the sense of triples, well, you know, again, systems biology is really good at for developing systems that can go through these different linkages. So we see that we can really do a lot of enablement here if we follow, if we mimic what we see the body doing, how it behaves and how it responds to different changes. Remember, the nice part about biology is, as I used to tell my students, you know, cells have no hobbies. They do everything for a reason. Right? We may not understand it, but there's a reason for it. So if we understand these pathways and we can make these linkages through data and understanding of these pathways, perhaps we can get greater insight. Or again, see what the possibilities are as far as treatment is concerned, diagnoses are concerned, all sorts of factors with regard to understanding biochemistry of disease.
And I would like to help transition to Sandra and tell you that we have been told this is impossible. This is not hypothesis testing. This is not the way we do things. It's too chaotic. What are you doing? And I say, fine, well and good. There's an urgency to get this done because the people who are affected by this is real. They don't want to hear something's impossible. They want to know, what are we doing? How fast are we working on it? And are you going to help us solve these problems? And so we're delighted to be here, but we want you to hear we aren't going to accept it can't be done. It's impossible. It's like going to the moon. But the reason is because we're running out of time for each and every person that's affected by this, 10% of the population.
Great. That was a good segue. And also Tara's extra tidbit was also a good segue about time to diagnose. So as she introduced me, I'm Sandra Talbird. I'm a researcher at RTI Health Solutions, the Health Economics Division there. To work a lot with data and medical research, economic models, quantifying burden of illness of various diseases, not just rare, all sorts of diseases, and building economic models. But the way that I first got involved in rare disease was that my mother was diagnosed with a rare autosomal dominant genetic disorder called CADASIL. It's an acronym, so I always have to spell it out for various doctors. And she was actually misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis for 12 years before she was diagnosed with CADASIL in 2010. And the only way that happened was that another family member was actually diagnosed. It's a neurological vascular condition. It's cardiovascular in nature, but it's also neurological. And you have many strokes over your lifetime. And so she, you know, we thought she had multiple sclerosis, went to her annual neurologist appointment every year, thought she was doing good for a multiple sclerosis patient. A family member got diagnosed with CADASIL because it is the way it's inherited. Autosomal dominant means that it runs through families. Basically, you have a 50% chance of having CADASIL, or if you have it, passing it on to your children flip a coin, 50% chance. And so then that meant if she has it, this person may have it. You know, long story short, I have a large, 40-person family. Every person in that family had a 50% chance they might not have known that they carried this mutation, and they weren't being affected by it because it's an adult onset disease. So Tara cited the statistic that 50% of the diseases affect children, particularly before the age of 5, but there are those that affect people later in their life, and you might not even know it. So that's how I got involved in rare disease. Some of my family members co-founded a patient advocacy organization called Cairns. There's one other patient advocacy organization in the U.S. And that a lot of times really is the path for people who learn, I have this disorder, there's no treatment. In Caddisell's case, there's very little research. Most research is happening in Europe. What can I do? I need to make a difference. And a lot of times the path to that. And a colleague of mine, Sharon King, that Tara introduced, also she was the founder of her daughter's organization for Batten's disease, Taylor's Tail. So that's really the patient side of the story and what is a common path for people. Later on, I got involved about a year and a half ago with North Carolina Rare Disease Coalition, which is really the patient advocacy arm of the council that Bruce leads and Tara's the coordinator for. And so then I kind of said, well, I wear multiple hats here. By the way, I also, in my professional life, work at RTI and work with data, and this is a real problem for rare disease. So if you could pick up my slide. Basically, one of the key questions when they won the NSF grant was, we want to quantify the impact of rare disease in North Carolina. We've seen, Tara mentioned a lot of the stats, 10% of people are affected by rare disease, so it's really not that rare. People are shocked. If rare disease is seen together, it's really not that rare. But the problem is, it is rarely diagnosed, or it's underdiagnosed, or it's misdiagnosed. We like to say the undiagnosed community is part of rare disease too, and there's talk about the undiagnosed group at Duke, which is really important. And so when Tara said, this is the question I want to answer, I want to answer what's the impact of rare disease in North Carolina, how many people are affected. Okay, North Carolina is 10 million people, so we know it's probably around 1 million. But quantify the direct medical costs of that. What is that? Across rare diseases, we have no idea. Cystic fibrosis, they have a diagnosis code. You can do a research study on that. You can mine DHS data, Medicaid data, Medicare data, but pan-rare diseases, that's really never been done before because it's just, there's so many. There's 7,000, and some have diagnosis codes, some don't. My main point here that I wanted to add is, so I basically said to Tara, how can I help you get data? So as part of the rare disease community, everybody has patient registries. So one other statistic that is interesting is that only approximately 600 to 700 of these 7,000 diseases have a diagnosis code. So in ICD-9, which is now shifted to ICD-10, is the diagnosis code that U.S. medical care uses, and only less than 10% of rare diseases even have a code.
And with that, I was to let you know, when we started working on this about a year and a half ago, I just started going out working with pharma, biotech, getting feedback. I thought data would have to exist. So I wanted to see what is the economic impact of North Carolina, no HIPAA information that I asked for, but by rare disease, just what hits Medicaid by rare disease North Carolina. You can't get it. I'm thinking just the cost of just one person that has a disease like Taylor's knee has, is significant. We need to know in the state how much is really sitting by these diseases to be able to better evaluate, policies, procedures, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, that was about it. So basically, I joined saying, how can I help you? How can I get data? I know it won't be as easy as Tara was hoping it would be. And so that kind of leads well into the data side of integrating systems, which is what this NSF planning grant is for, to see how we could integrate systems. I was trying to provide data on if you go to the next slide, the patient registry side, which is, I don't know, this is just an example of how difficult it can be. And so, you know, how would this project help patients? Basically, this bottom part of the slide. It will improve diagnosis. It can definitely reduce diagnosis time, but also improve research. I mean, patients are out there who want to be diagnosed if they're on their diagnosis journey, which, as Sarah said, I think it has an average time of 7 years. Some patients up to 10, 12 years. Some patients who we were actually just talking to still undiagnosed. They know they're dealing with their disorder, and they don't know what it is.
And you have rare diseases like, we have a center of excellence at UNC called HHC. It affects many organs in the body, but it's a fatal disease, and the average diagnosis time is 30. So that's where we go to NC State and say, hey, you know, we'd like to see a database at least initially starting in North Carolina to say all of the affiliations in North Carolina, if you're affiliated with rare disease at all, whether you're a research, clinician, pharma, biotech, we'd like a database that had that information, what the rare diseases were, information about the person who's studying, whatever they're working with rare disease. And Michael added in, like, we do clinicaltrials.gov. It can all be in one database, and then maybe a symptomatic code that can help, especially these doctors that really don't know that much about rare diseases. And I will tell you, I work with many patient advocates. I'm working with patients that they live their life. Right now they have 2 children, ages 5 and 2, with rare diseases that have not been diagnosed. They live their life PCU'd at UNC Hospital. And the frustration of every single person I meet, they're reinventing the wheel. They don't know where to go. They're looking on Facebook. There's not really a central resource that helps coordinate that, which is part of what this data Michael.
Yeah, so what we're sort of taking the approach now to say, we really do have a plentiful supply of tools to do analytics. You know, I'm preaching to the choir here. What we have to understand, though, is depending upon the type of question we're asking, will determine the type of tool and analytic we're going to apply. So the way we've approached the problem is not to say, well, we'll do, you know, develop a database or a database, but rather go back to the point I made earlier, which was to say, look, if we can frame these questions appropriately, we'll figure out the appropriate tools to put data in the appropriate structure to do the analytic or to do the retrieval. Now, what this does is it allows us to build different types of systems so that we can tailor it to what does a physician need in order to enable an understanding or better insight to their patient. What does pharma need with regard to what are the mechanisms or pathways that can be explored, and what does a patient's group need with regard to who are the supports, what are the support systems, where can they go? All of these are different types of questions that require different types of input. Now, what we've been able to do is to really be agnostic about where information comes from by the types of infrastructure we build. So if you think about it from a data point of view, we're ingesting anything from structured data in databases to unstructured text and figuring out ways of doing a series of filters on it. And what we start with is generally some high-level filters that allow us to isolate into different categories of information. And from there, we can become more definitive in how we do the extraction, get our specificity and context down, and then evolve the analytic around that. Now, what we've tried to do, or what we are in the process of doing, and I'd have to say we're moving along very well, is with an exemplar, and that's with PCD, which is a primary ciliary dyskinesia, which is a defect in the cilia and cells. Right? It's very interesting. I hadn't really heard of this one before. The world's expert in it is at UNC, Mike Knowles. And what we've tried to do, and what we're doing, is we're working with Mike and his team to understand, when you look at a patient, how do you perceive that patient? What are the processes you're going through? How are you doing your sort with regard to what are the signs and symptoms? What are the clinical presentations? What is the hierarchy of decision-making process you're doing? And then can we mimic that in some form of analytic, either first through understanding and sorting the information appropriately, and then doing the extraction. Now, once we do the extraction, then we can start thinking about how do we want, what we what we have at the end of the day, if you think about it, is a matrix around that individual. Once I have a matrix, right, sky's the limit. Then I can start playing. Now I can start doing my math. Now I can start looking at relationships. So the idea here is, how can I take and transform what Dr. Knowles sees and get it so the machine has set all that stuff up for it. So it's there in a nice table. This is, everything is here. Now, what we then go back to is to say, hey, look, if I see all these things lined up, what's the probability that it's this disease? So in essence, what we're doing is filling out a matrix, understanding what has higher priorities than other things in that matrix, and looking at co-associations. The thing about the machine, what really enables us to, the machine is, if you think about a patient who's had 30 years of medical records, you try to find some medical student who wants to do that extraction. Okay? So that's where the machines come in very handy, right? You're not going to get tired. If I can translate the way that the physician thinks about the diagnosis code, the triaging, then I can make the machine mimic that step and fill in the blanks for it. Where the machine can't fill in, then can I apply probabilistic methods to see whether or not I have a higher or lower likelihood of a disease? The answer is yes. And that's what we're building now. Now, the nice thing about that sort of system is, because it is systems-based, we can move from one disease to another disease to another disease.
So on a very practical level, you know, this is a planning grant, and we are enormously appreciative of the support of the Data Hub. And we really are trying to create this rare disease observatory, and then the idea would be that we would have a full BD spoke proposal that would allow us to really answer these questions, because this is a very ambitious agenda. I think the other very specific set of questions that we have is going to be, how do you even approach this? How do you prioritize what information you need? What's available, what's not available, and what will have the largest impact? So how do you sort of triage a system like this? The thing could be scaled up and then be applied across the North Carolina, but then the other South BD Spoke Hub states, and then of course nationally, with the idea being that we would like to develop a framework in the beginning that could then have a very specific set of goals for a larger proposal.
You guys successfully answered all the questions I had lined up.
I'm not sure. You can ask them and see. We always have, we can probably change our answers. That's right.
Okay, all right. Well,
We almost never do.
I guess we're beginning to go down the path of technical skills, extraction strategy, what kinds of data you ingest and what you can't, and how the data or the process is stored. Maybe you could get a little more into it, because we have data science room here.
All right, so, you know, a lot of the information that we get is structured. If I'm thinking about laboratory findings, right, if I can add, subtract, multiply, divide, and I have a structured data set. We do a lot of work in unstructured text analytics. I don't know if I was fortunate enough to be involved with the development of the Watson process using unstructured text analytics, UEMA framework, and worked with IBM in developing medical annotators and such. So I've implemented that same sort of strategy. So what that allows us to do now is go into medical records and pull the facts that we need out of medical records in a pretty straightforward manner. What we do is we do a combination of a rules-based system along with a little bit of machine learning, right? Because what we try to do, and there are all different philosophies about this, but my take is that I'm going to introduce a little bit of bias in the beginning. I want to focus on known data sets. I want to ingest all that material. And then when I have those results, then I'll apply different types of facts and word strategies to see if I've missed anything to bring in the appropriate pieces of information. Now, philosophically, the other point I'd like to make is I focus more on accuracy than precision, okay? So I know what I'm really looking for now is, do I have the right context for the return, and does it have the capability of answering the question? Is it a fact? Right? Those are the sorts of tests that we do. And then we go through a whole process of understanding how to build the annotators and deploy the annotators those sorts of things. Now I take that together and now I do conversion of the annotations into a numeric framework that allows me to line it up in my structured data sets. Once I have that in place, then we overlay yet another matrices or table that deals with the physician and how they rate or score different activities. So now what I can do is I can run things like COSIS against it, or some sort of multi-criteria decision-making algorithm that allows me to look at all these combination of facts and come up with a score system. That in turn says, okay, we have a good high probability or low probability that the information we've captured is relevant. So the types of data we get, like I said, are medical records, but we also go in and do things like PubMed to be able to correlate, this is one of the ways we test the system. Can I get an annotator that can extract all these values out of 1,000 papers from PubMed that would allow me to answer questions about this disease? The answer is yeah, we can do that. We build systems and it shows us how we're extracting the appropriate information. We then roll that over into the medical record to see how it works. Okay? Now, the framework that we use, like I said, it is UEMA, and there are, get real technical?
Yes.
Okay.
But define all terms.
Pardon?
Define any jargon terms.
Okay, I'll define it. So, one of the things that I'm constantly battling with different compute organizations is cloud, okay, and the fact that there are certain applications that just do not run well in a cloud environment. Solar is one of them, right? And basically, underneath all of the annotations, all the stuff that Watson does, the framework is basically a combination of Zika, Nutch, Solar, Lucy, and UEMA, right? That's all bundled together. I hope, can people hear me on the phone? They're getting big.
Actually, people can hear everybody really well except for that, and that's probably because your speaker.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say
Is that the first?
So, from a performance point of view, when you start dealing with very large indexes and trying to maintain the temporary file systems and I/O rates, input-output rates, what we found was it became impossible to have, it was very difficult to run stateless machines. They had to be stateful. That is, we had to know where the stuff was, physical locations, things had to go back and forth appropriately, or the machines would die. The other problem that we had was the number of threads and such. We often had problems with heap size in Java with regard to how much memory things would consume. So we developed, and this we worked out with IBM. Truthfully, this took about 6 years of work to figure out in understanding how to get the appropriate architecture to do this type of analytic. And what we ended up developing was on their power architecture, and using that combined with their ESS and GPFS. And we brought in Mellanox as well to use their InfiniBand switches, because what we really needed to have was seamless data transfers during all this indexing. Now, once we overcame that problem, then the ingest rate wasn't the issue that it was. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny because we were doing this, we were about 2 years ahead of the Watson proper, and we sat around putting wages on when they would come to us and say they can't do ingest properly. It took them months to figure it out. But we do have, we figured out how to tune the systems appropriately. So this is actually one of these cases where, if you're going to call it a cloud, it's not really going to be a dynamic cloud with images per se, but rather a static application or a set of machines that are dedicated to this type of activity, or else you're in for a whole bunch of heartache.
So, following up on what you just said, and I hate to keep
It's
going
okay.
here. You mentioned medical records. You mentioned information the doctors provide. Are there other sources of information?
Sure.
Like now we're thinking the quantified self that people can be, they've got Fitbits and other devices.
Oh, it's wonderful. Everybody wants to share everything. I personally don't understand it, but it's out there and we can get it. So, no, as a matter of fact, in things like the rare diseases, we'll go to the blogs of the patients who are there. So we get get a good understanding, and now this gets to the patient side of things, right? So we need to understand what are the white spaces there with regard to what are their wants and needs, and are we meeting them appropriately? Well, by doing these sorts of extractions, either looking through the blogs or understanding the support groups, we can start to develop a profile around them. Much like Amazon does with you, we can do the same thing with regard to, well, what are their concerns, can we direct them to the right places? And hopefully we can do this in a seamless fashion. To me, one of the last things that a patient group wants to do is to have to struggle through a website to try to find a piece of information that they need. So if we can get the input from these different sources and set it up in a way that's easy for them to see, then we'd also use big data to really help them out as well.
So if I can just add, you know, if we're so excited about this strategy, for those of us who have to go through medical health records all the time now, where they don't talk to each other, Cerner and Epic, Siemens, and the PubMed, and just the wealth of information that's possible, much less what the patients and their families are trying to feed us. There's no structured mechanism for us to address this issue, not just for one disease, certainly not for rare diseases. And so the idea would be, can we leverage some of these really advanced developments in data management and input, and really create a framework where not only would it address our specific issue, but might help us solve some of these siloed data storage management interaction problems on a larger scale.
Great. Well, let's open it up now for questions either from the in-person audience, and I think we have about 40 people or so online. Would anyone like to start?
Sure. Just wondering, in the system that you were talking about, you talked about unstructured text data, and then also when you talked about some of the structured, you mentioned computing with mathematical computations. But do you include in your computable data data that's encoded with some semantics from ontologies that you can compute more directly with?
To tell you the truth, and I generally get in trouble with this, we found it easier to build our own semantic system that focuses on, because what we want to do is have a very transportable process that's based on different systems interactions. We've developed our own, and we found that has become the most flexible platform for us to do this type of analytic with. Now, when you think about the semantics or known types of ontologies, you can be somewhat restricted in how it interprets information. So we sort of viewed it as, well, we know what we want to do. We take certain parts that we leverage and bring it into the system. Things like, if you look at MEDRA, right, because MEDRA is the adverse drug reporting system. They have a common glossary of terms and how they describe different systems, but we incorporate that into the system. We incorporate ICH into the system. So all of those pieces are there and being tagged and brought along and developed into that big truth table or matrix I talked about. So yeah, we do leverage it, but we're not totally dependent on it. Okay?
I forgot to mention, if you're online, you can type your question into the chat box. Carl will alert us that you have a question online, and we will ask you to turn your mic to us. Anyone else in the room? Chris?
Yeah, so I'm not a medical person, so just, bear with me, because I don't know, like, sort of what's your theory of disease and how that drives your algorithms. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think anybody defined what a rare disease is.
That's a good question. Actually, the definition varies worldwide. I think IOM has adopted a definition. World Health Organization has adopted a definition. So in the U.S., it actually has a bit of a strange definition. Most of it's usually a 1 per 100,000 people. But in the U.S., it's actually any disease or disorder that affects less than 200,000 people, which is approximately 4 to 5 per 100,000.
Yeah, so it's very interesting because you all were sort of arguing that the rare diseases aren't really that rare, right? So in the system that you're working on or envisioning, is it, here's a disease with a bunch of symptoms, we're going to do a matching, or is it we're going to turn the system loose on a bunch of data and see if it comes up with the same clusters of of people with like things, you know, because maybe, as I think some of you were alluding, that there's connections that, you know, humans like to see patterns, right? Well, they don't always see the right patterns, so they might be diseases that are connected in other ways.
Yeah, okay. So what we try to do is we start with bias. That is, we're looking for some certain things. And if we don't, and hopefully we'll see that we'll shift the data in one way, shape, or form with that. And the nice part about it is we can, once we have that piece done, we can then go back and do that. Well, let's let the machine have added approaches now. And it's that melding of the two. You know, one of the problems that I face with some of my people, remember, I'm an immunologist in a computer world now, which has been an interesting transition. One of the things that I try to get them to understand is that, look, we want to have some sort of context, and there's nothing to stop me from having this joint approach, right? So let's synergize this stuff. One thing is not exclusive of the other. It's sort of like when the quant people say they don't want to listen to the qualitative people. Well, you're not going to get a good response this way. Same thing.
Well, can I love the question, and I'm not a data person, so that means I'll respond in an even more ignorant way. Just, you know, as a physician, I think that paradox or the dynamic that you asked is why this is such a beautiful question from my perspective. Because as Mike just said, it's both. So yes, it's rare if it's a rare condition, and it's absolutely common if you lump them all together at 7,000 diseases with all of these various phenotypes. The beauty is that you can really try to get in depth for one particular condition, say cystic fibrosis, where we have a fair amount of data, but there's still a lot of work to try to figure out how to connect all of this and be able to come up with some useful guidance on anything, including people who are seeing a patient that may or may not have cystic fibrosis. And then you have all these other syndromes where it's really not entirely clear. We have more and more data coming out. You know, now that we've mapped the human genome, we're understanding more and more what these mutations are. We're understanding other aspects of the way the precision medicine might work, or drug targeting, all of these new developments, but there's not a really effective way to integrate that, and there's not a structure for to integrate it. So that's why we think it's so exciting, because there's any number of questions that might seem on the broad spectrum and diametrically opposed, but for rare diseases, they're all relevant to each other.
And I think when we first started talking to NC State, Michael and John about this, what we envisioned is that it would be, you know, Mladen would envision this like a portal, that there's going to be a lot of data about it. Maybe part of it is going to be what patient advocates can access, part of it's going to be what clinicians can access, researchers access, and eventually pharma has been very vocal about the data they would like to see, of course, in order to expedite clinical trials, such as like, you know, by disease, where do people live, what are the, you know, where are they located, and things of that nature. So I kind of envision it as a portal that it will serve a lot of different communities in the rare disease area.
Yeah, our strategy is to set up basically a set of metatables, right, depending upon who the user is and what they need. And that'll be the metatable is derived from a series of different tooling.
And
So I kind of have a biology question, I think. And it's one that was triggered by Chris Austin at a meeting where he was explaining to this project group that nobody has a catalog of all the diseases, which I found very interesting, and it's really haunted me. So I guess I'm asking you all who have much better biological knowledge than I do you believe that there are a discrete number of diseases and therefore a discrete number of phenotypes that you could actually biologically differentiate with clarity?
So again, I'm not a data person, but I see that as a data question as much as a biological question, because everything is a continuum, just like life, just like age. You know, for a burn patient, 20 years old is middle-aged, 30 years old is old, and anything older than that, your survival risk is very low. So it depends on the circumstance where you fit into a continuum. But then at the same time, there's discrete patterns of disease phenotypes and potential drug therapeutics. Because remember, when you get on a plane the expectation is the plane will take off and the plane will land. That is not true when you're born. When you're born, at some point, the biological systems fail, and we all die. So the expectation that we're always going to be at the same place is going to be very different. What we're trying to do is figure out a very practical way to sort of take this continuum, which could be enormously complex, so therefore impossible, and say, well, we have to decide, because the vast majority of you, I'll presume, would rather not come see a doctor. None of you want to come see the burn doctor. And so therefore, this is not relevant to you until you get sick or until your child gets sick. And so the question is, for the people who have to access the system, how can we use this new burst of information to catalog it to effectively deliver that care better? So I think it's a continuum for sure, but the real effectiveness is how can you take all of this data that's just really confusing and give it hierarchical nature so that you can use it appropriately to make a difference in people's lives rather than just have it be noise.
And I just want to clarify, there are, just in case the information you received, there are multiple large databases that have a very comprehensive attempt at cataloging the rare diseases. So there's Orphanet in Europe. There's a Genetic and Rare Disease Program, which is the NIH, National Institute of Health, has a large database. But there is a wide variety of taxonomies used. So we've already talked about ICD-9 codes. There's also SNOMED codes, which even being a data person, I'd never heard of, and going to the doctor, I'd never heard of these other codes. There's OMIM codes. But none of those databases claim to be comprehensive, kind of because of the question you asked.
I mean,
that's
discrete
or not.
The fundamental problem that Chris Austin's getting, and the way he said that to you and the way I interpreted your question, is there's no way to have a comprehensive list of diseases. So every single one of them, whether it's the taxonomy and the SNOMED or the ICD-9 or the ICD-10 or the clinical descriptions or genetic descriptions, they all create these differences in phenotype. And then you can have comorbidities on top of that. So as you get older, or if you had a viral infection, I mean, a million things can happen to you. The question is, can you take the major players that are really affecting your ability to have a healthy life, or the ones that you know you can intervene with, and make a difference? You can diagnose them earlier, and you get them into certain kinds of treatment, you won't have this long-term effect. So it ends up being, I know I'm not using these terminologies correctly, a hierarchical question, so that what answer comes out is not just information, but it's useful information.
Yeah, and that's where we want to link it back to what is the biology, what's going on, because that to me is the way that allows us to now try to answer the predictive effects in the sense of, if I can find, if I'm a researcher and I can find commonalities in pathways and different diseases and things like that, and new associations, it opens up new possibilities. And this is really where we want to take the machines, right? This is what they're good at. The trick is in organizing the information and making the connection.
And imagine if you took this approach and you had an intuitive tool that could take the information that's being put in and then be able to suggest how a drug could be repurposed or what the side effects of that drug would be if it's repurposed, then it would develop a tool that would be more efficient for drug development, rather than, I'm sure you all know about the cost of developing drugs and the failure rate, and then the inability to figure out what the side effects are. And so what's beautiful in my view about this rare disease question is that the enormous complexity of it makes it seem like there's no real practical answer to it. At the same time, there is a very vocal, urgent, driving need to not let that be the answer. And so we're at that interface doing something nobody's ever tried to do before, which I just wanted to say, I hadn't had a chance, how much we appreciate being a part of the BD Hub. Because the reality is that if this program didn't exist, the NSF hadn't created it, and you all hadn't been interested in sort of these kinds of large, big questions, this would not happen. It would not exist. The collaborations with NC State, talking with Michael about thinking about these issues, being in front of you and thinking about how can we make this happen, creating the political wherewithal at the state and the federal government level. This is too beyond what we normally do for anybody to accept this. So the thinking outside of the proverbial box that you all have created with this has been foundational to what we've been able to talk about today.
So can I ask one more question? I'm sorry to persist, but I find this absolutely fascinating. So you said why rare was rare but yet common. I understand what you're saying. But I would think that the other really valuable, and I'm making a presumption here that this is true, so please correct me if I'm wrong. The other really valuable aspect of looking at rare diseases is that, this is my hypothesis, they all are almost certainly linked to genomic.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
So it's 80%.
80%.
So what is the other 20%?
What's the other 20% of rare diseases? So the things I deal with. So for example, if you get a drug, and you get and 100% of your skin falls off, it's called toxic epidermal necrolysis syndrome. We have no idea what the genetics are.
Or rare cancer.
Right.
Or if you get an autoimmune disease, like Guillain-Barré, which strips your nerves and then you're completely paralyzed and then it comes back. And somebody says, well, how'd you get that? I don't know. You don't have any idea.
In both of those cases that there's probably a genetic variant or collection of variants?
Well, one
maybe not known
one could say that's probably true of everything.
Yeah.
So, you know, because remember that all of these biological problems are related to development. Development is all related to genetic information. Genetic information is shared amongst, you know, almost all of our species. It's all in the processing. And then you could say it's all in then, you know, what happens to you. Now, of course, trauma, we always say, you know, I'm consider myself a trauma surgeon. There's no cure for stupid, and we don't really have the genetic basis for stupidity. So I don't know if everything could be linked to that direct correlation. But as it relates to specifically the issues we're talking about, the value of being able to just take that presumption that you made would be enormously valuable, not just for rare diseases.
That was my point. I think
But for everything.
diseases are these sentinels.
And that's what we've been trying to sell, and I'm glad you saw that. You can help me sell that to some other people.
Exactly. But the issue becomes one of what people tend to do, and this I observed in my own life, and my molecular biologist, they would look at their one gene, like very deeply. They didn't understand. What they were looking at was one snapshot in time of what was going on with the genetic control systems, okay? One gene, one snapshot. We got to get better at understanding the continuum and the temporal relationship.
Yeah, I heard a talk recently where somebody was talking about 212 variants that may have caused this disease. And I thought, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. So,
You don't have to excuse me.
okay.
Thank you very much for coming.
That's totally fascinating. We got to help them get a full.
We're happy.
I made notes.
Thanks, Dan.
So we've still got time, just because Stan leaves. Interesting. Do folks have other questions for the group?
Any question is acceptable, because I know nothing, so feel free to ask any question.
So I think one of you alluded, sorry, Chris, did you?
Well, mine's not quite so focused on this project, but I saw a very interesting talk from IBM on cognitive computing, Watson, Diagnose cancer, blah, blah, blah. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, you already mentioned Watson, but how your approaches are complementary? Or...
They're very similar. Basically, what they've done is they've integrated the machine learning aspect of things into their system. Mine, I have to manually move from one system to another system to do the analytics. But at the end of the day, we're doing the same thing. They are a bit more focused on precision, and because of that, they're not able to, they're not comfortable with some of the things that they extract. And when they do that, what they do is they basically dumb down the machine. And it annoys the heck out of me, because what they're doing is they're not putting their best foot forward with regard to how the technology can work with that. So if you understand, if you're looking at it from the point of view of, does this thing answer the question? And stop worrying about, I got 9 out of the 10 parts that was in this paper, and it missed one. As I said to them, does that one change your opinion? Right? So it becomes more of an engineering issue. Now, the other thing is, I think what we've done and we've tried to convey to them is we have a very nice process that helps people, like when I work with Mike Knowles, to work through the system that enables us to quickly translate what he's doing into the code that we need to run on the machine. It's very orderly, and it's really nice because now we can pass it from, I don't care if I'm dealing with, I can deal with the SEC one day, NSA another day, and medical people on the third day, and the process remains the same.
So we know we've got 38 people online, or 40 or so. Really would like to encourage folks in our online audience to either tweet at us with their question, which is South Big Data Hub SDBH17, or Carl is monitoring the WebEx. So if you could put your question in the chat box and we'll call on you. Okay, Carl?
And Mark Jack has a question.
Okay, Mark, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Is there a GitHub repository of computational tools, specifically machine learning algorithms, that are used in the field of rare diseases, particularly autoimmune diseases, for a theoretical physicist to get started and involved? He's listening to you.
We love that kind of a question.
That's a great question. Actually, what we're trying to do now is develop a series of images that combine the ingest, analytic, and output, so that a person who wants to work in this field will have a package that they could deploy into their infrastructure and do this type of analytic. The question is, we're developing it now. No, it's not ready yet, but we hope to have it ready sometime this year.
Well, what I love about that question, and thank you for that, is that this kind of question is exactly what we're trying to do from my perspective, which is engage really capable, smart people who are thinking about their issues from a completely different perspective, but then have a very focused interest. And why are we so interested in that? Is because the more information we have coming in and the kinds of questions that people have, there's no doubt there will be a pattern that will allow us to figure out how to leverage the partnerships that we're trying to develop here with the big data I spoke of, because the people who are online and the people who are in this room are thinking about these kinds of issues, and they can help us frame how to move forward. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Well, if I could give an example from the patient advocacy side of the value and to your question about the algorithm, and are you matching symptoms to rare diseases, and what are patients, but also patient advocacy groups, really, what are they looking for? So I talked earlier about patients want to get diagnosed, but they also want to participate in research because ultimately they want to find an effective cure or treatment. And so a real-world example of just to refer to the disease that affects my family is my mom was misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So once she was diagnosed, I thought about it on a personal level, but one of my organization's big initiatives was, we know it's always misdiagnosed as multiple sclerosis, or it's misdiagnosed when you're older in life as Alzheimer's disease. I had a list of all the various 15 things that, commonly misdiagnosed as. And so we naively said, couldn't we just go to multiple sclerosis centers? There's a US MS center, there's a Duke MS center, and educate physicians. Well, first of all, physicians don't like to be educated.
That's absolutely correct. That's because we already know everything, just in case you want.
But really, it was just saying, hey, have you heard of, Caterpillar? Have you heard of this disease? And, what would you test for it? Why wouldn't you test for it? And what we heard on a small scale from MS doctors was, oh no, that's so far low on the differential for multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is kind of a negative disease. You can't definitively diagnose it, so you kind of exclude everything it could be. So we're still persisting and saying, couldn't you at least consider it as something to exclude? And just really haven't gotten very positive feedback. And so what a patient advocacy organization has had to do, and for various other diseases similar to this, they have to create these patient profiles themselves. So one of my slides said, and I approached another medical center saying, could you do a study in Caterpillar? They said, oh, this is intriguing. I'd really love to do this. Let me see how many patients we have. You're not going to be able to find that because there's no ICD-9 code. So then patient advocacy organizations are having to say, look for high-risk patients. Maybe look at people who are diagnosed with vascular dementia, misdiagnosed with MS that have a history of MS. Look at this, 15 different, you can't tell me that's the most efficient way for patient advocacy, nonprofit organizations to have to undertake this, to create these algorithms.
But see, what's so fascinating about this is that the workaround solution that causes frustration for the patient advocacy groups is what it takes to change the way we think about diagnosing disease. But it's also about how you educate people, because you have a limited amount of time, you have a limited amount of resources. How do you decide which of these potentially now hundreds of diagnoses you're going to pursue? And then one of the goals would be to figure out how to help people understand how to approach that problem. And if we could get the systems analysis to be advanced enough, it would help guide that process so that people, instead of saying, we don't think about that, would be able to go down until you get.
And apply that to all those rare diseases is just
Because everybody is recreating the wheel. Everybody does the same thing. Exactly, thousands of times.
We have another question, and actually, if that person could unmic their phone so that we can hear them ask the question, that would be great.
Rajarshi's question is, how important are data sharing and related policy development in these efforts, especially as you look to scale up beyond, say,
Can I take it?
Oh, please.
I actually, so everybody groans, but I actually don't groan. And the reason I don't groan is because we like to find a big problem and then fix it, because there's nothing intuitively obvious about that question that shouldn't be able to be overcome. This is about human behavior.
Yes.
And so the reason I like dealing with human behavior is because you don't want to say one thing and then do another. So in other words, we're all in this together. We've taken the Hippocratic Oath. We want to help people. But then we are uber protective of our data that we won't share. Or we'll say, well, now we have a collective IRB system, which we are trying to develop through our Clinical Translational Science Award. But then the IRBs will operate like the county sheriff did 50 years ago and say, not in my county, you can't get that approved. And so the question then becomes, how do you overcome something like that? And I think the way you do that is you bring something new to the table. And it's an innovative strategy of looking at data analytics, and then you use the infrastructure that's supposed to create data sharing opportunities, and now you give them a reason to do it, as opposed to just out of the goodness of your heart, you're supposed to change your behavior. And then that way you can begin to break down silos, and most importantly, show people that it can be done. And that's how you begin to change the culture. So I'm interested in small gains here. There's a lot of momentum to try to address the data sharing problem. But without a doubt, one of the greatest hindrances to all of these programs has been that fundamental question.
Yeah, it's the culture. It really is. And what we're trying to do is we're saying, well, it's all well and good, and we think we have ways of addressing this problem, and we just got to persevere in this thing. But I've got to tell you, it's really remarkable, and to a certain extent understandable, but it's how we get over this now, especially in the era of data. If we really want machines to help us out and to make our lives easier, we got to get over this command and control stuff.
So my hypothesis is that the value of the data sharing isn't enough for people to overcome the risk-averse component of it. And so they are able to use that as an argument that it's not worth doing. It's not going to really fundamentally change the way they do business. We're trying to get people to think, using maybe a couple of examples, that the only way we're going to move forward is as we change the way we, which is what this project really is.
And I think it gets back to what you said initially. We don't have time to wait. Every day that goes by that just, to speed up a diagnosis, or, like Sharon King found in Taylor's Tale, and who's one of the reasons we're here today, is, her daughter was diagnosed. She realized, look, I know my daughter's not going to be saved, but I will make sure that other parents don't have to deal with this. And so every day, somebody who's territorial, tell that to a parent.
Exactly.
And I went out to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation website today and preparing these slides, and it just reminded me that the burden right now really is on the patients and on the parents, because cystic fibrosis, you know, lots of big foundation, a lot of research going on, making really great steps. And one of the things on their website when I was trying to look up the different mutations, to give an example of a different disease that's well-coded but has various mutations, and research is targeted at specific mutations. And the tagline at the top of the website said, to the patients, you know your mutation, use our mutation analyzer tool. And so you have to know this, which, you know, something like this where doctors would be the owners and be able to help guide research more, guide patients looking for answers, just would be a more efficient way of working with
So we think this project could actually drive a solution to solving the data sharing.
Do we have any other further questions on the line? Okay. So the last question, I think, might be, how do you see this data observatory being replicated in other places around the country or in other verticals?
I could take that, and let Michael actually explain the reality of it. It has to be replicated. If this is a one-off proprietary solution to North Carolina that cannot be transported first across the South big data hubs and then across the nation, it's fundamentally failed in its objective. So what it must do, because of the rarity of the diseases and its geographic distribution, at the get-go, it has to include an answer to that question. And Michael understands that, but I'm going to have to let him explain how it's going to get done.
And what we said is that, you know, as I said at the beginning, is we have this process that allows us to go in and interrogate an organization with regard to what they want to do with data and how they want to approach data. And what that does is it focuses the activity hopefully away from some of the perceptions to really what needs to be done to answer questions. Now, the beauty of the system that we're developing is it's all open source, right? And we're designing the system so that it can be reproduced from business vertical to business or institution to institution. There's nothing proprietary about this. You can get it, you can do your images, and this is what we hope to have at the end of the, the year, is you pull up an image, you want to do the ingest part, you want to do the analytic part, you want to do the display part. It's all bundled together. So if you think about how we can approach an organization, and we can talk about IRPs and data security. Well, depending upon the data size, I told you a little bit about some of the problems with stateless environments. It's still possible to go in and say, look, you can install all these analytic tools behind your firewall and do your analysis. The remnants that you're going to get from us is, look at this infrastructure we're giving you, right? That's a win-win. Now we have to start looking at, now what we've done is we've taken, okay, you said there's nothing in it for you, we've given you something now. You're saying you're concerned about security, it's inside your environment. You want to learn how to use it, we'll teach you how to use it.
And imagine if you build that infrastructure across the country, how it would transform the way we look at all of these problems, including research and care and economics. I mean, it would be an extraordinarily valuable, powerful tool that we could all benefit from, that would make our lives efficient and exciting and vibrant and allow us to do what we're here to do better.
Any last comments here from the panel? Okay, thank you. Thank you. We're quite pleased to have you and quite pleased to have everyone attend, and those online. We really appreciate your great questions. So yes, we'd like to extend a warm thank you to our panelists. But I have a few announcements before we close. First, if you're interested in attending the Southern Data Science Conference, of which the South Big Data Hub is co-sponsoring, Our early bird discounts and a special South Big Data Hub discount end today. So the discount is SBD Hub 2017 is the code, and you can learn more about it at the SouthernDataScience.com website. Tomorrow we'll host the last webcast of the South Hub's Vital Data series, which is run out of Georgia Tech, our co-partner in the Hub, from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Visit our calendar of events on the South Hub's website, southbigdatahub.org. And this Friday, our infrastructure and data sharing working group will be meeting from 3 o'clock to 4:30. We've got some great demonstrations and discussions there, another panel of groups. One, I think Jennifer Hammock from the Encyclopedia of Life will be talking about the biodiversity sciences and data science, and we've got the Open Science Framework folks coming on Friday, which we're excited about that. Again, go to southbigdatahub.org and look at our calendar of events. Finally, our next South Big Data Hub Roundtable will be focused on March 9th from noon until 1:30 Eastern, and it will be a panel on antisocial computing. So things like ISIS and fake news and Twitter bots. So that should be a very lively conversation. We will be hosting it in collaboration with the University of Arkansas at Carnegie Mellon University. So we'll be up at Carnegie Mellon for that event. But again, it'll be on the web, so everyone across the country should be able to watch. So with that, thank you all, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.